Welcome everyone to today's webinar, and again, depending on your time zone, good afternoon or good morning. This is Doug Robinson, Executive Director at NASCIO. I want to welcome all of our NASCIO members, our state and corporate members, as well as other state officials and Strategic Partner Association and other guests to today's webinar. This is a very important topic, and as you can expect, we have a very large audience for today's event, and so we are going to globally mute all lines. All lines are currently on mute except for speakers to avoid any external disturbances that might disrupt our speakers today. Just a few items on logistics. Again, if you wish to submit a question, on your toolbar you have a chat feature, and you can use that. And I urge you again to submit questions early and often, and we will leave time at the end of the webinar today to cover any of the questions that we get. And again, given the scope and the magnitude of both this topic as well as the extent of the survey, we're only going to have time to cover key results from the survey today, and you will see those during your slide deck. But however, the complete report, of course, is available and has been for the last few weeks from both the NASCIO and Deloitte websites. So I certainly urge you, if you haven't seen the report, to read the study, to review the recommendations, pass it on to others, and certainly talk to other state officials and other state leaders about the implications of state governments at risk. And we certainly know, given the past year with the extent of state data breaches and security incidents, that this is an extremely important topic, and we will be covering the results of some of those key elements of the 2012 Deloitte NASCIO cybersecurity study today during this webinar. In addition, we are recording the webinar for playback, and it will be available for download from the NASCIO website after the conclusion of the event today. So let me take a few minutes and introduce our speakers today. We have joining us today Brenda Decker, who's the current president of NASCIO and the CIO for the state of Nebraska. In fact, our most senior tenure CIO in the country at over 7 years in her current position. We also have joining us Kristen Miller, who's a principal in the public sector practice at Deloitte. And some of you may recall Kristen was formerly the CIO of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and certainly knowledgeable about the implications and consequences of security incidents in a state government environment. And then finally, we have Srini Subramanian, another principal in the security and privacy practices of state government in Deloitte. And we've worked with Srini for many years, and he's the principal lead for our survey engagement in the cooperation in a collaborative project with NASCIO. We did this survey in 2010. He was the lead then, and he continued in this capacity and has been ably assisted by an excellent team at Deloitte that we've worked with, again, over the past several years. I want to thank them for all their effort, and we certainly want to acknowledge and recognize the state chief information security officers and others that responded to the survey for 2012. We had an extraordinary response rate. It was a very comprehensive instrument that required a significant amount of time and research before the survey was submitted, so we certainly want to acknowledge and thank them for their efforts. So again, with those introductions, I'd like now to turn it over to Brenda Decker in Nebraska for her presidential welcome and any opening remarks that she might have. Brenda?
First of all, I want to welcome everybody to this webinar for the Deloitte NASCIO Cybersecurity Study. Each year NASCIO polls all the state CIOs and asks about our top 10 priorities, and cybersecurity always remains on that list. Our states are at risk every single day, and these threats continue to become more and more sophisticated. For all the reasons that are listed on the slide that you're now seeing, the state governments have to continue to remain vigilant in this area. States have a unique responsibility, and I don't think that's a surprise to anybody on this call, to protect the information we collect in our information resource databases. The state governments, we really have one of the largest repositories and collections of personally identifiable information on our citizens. We know where you work, we know where you live, we know how much you make, we know what your children are, sometimes we know of your health issues, sometimes we have your banking information. And in a lot of those cases, that information isn't given to the state, it isn't given to us voluntarily. You have to provide that information if you want to drive on our roads or obtain a professional license or use some of our services. So we really have to talk in our states about making sure that we have that information protected and truly in our possession to and authorized to only the people that are authorized to access that information. So, you know, the report you're about to be briefed on was really an effort to provide state governments with a tool to understand the various issues in the area of cybersecurity and to use the report and the recommendations to strengthen our state security programs. I really want to thank everyone who is taking the time to be on this call, for participating in the webinar. Our security programs are only as strong as our weakest links, and ensuring that we continue to have partnerships with our providers, with our agencies, and with the private sector is the only way that we're going to be able to protect this information. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Doug, and let you guys move forward with the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Appreciate your time to join us today. We've got, again, an impressive set of speakers here today, and we have, again, a very large number of participants. So, again, I echo Brenda's comments about appreciating taking time from your busy schedules to join us today for this briefing. At this point, I'm going to turn it to Srini at Deloitte, and he's going to provide you with an overview of the study that we did in 2012. Srini?
Thank you, Doug. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Doug, for the opportunity, and good day, everyone. First, I wanted to just go over what the study was about and some key differences between the study that we did in 2010 and 2012. As you can see in the slide, we really based this to the primary objective was to really assess the state of the cybersecurity programs in the state. And part of this study, we also wanted to compare the results with the 2010 Deloitte NASCIO cybersecurity study, as well as with a private sector study that Deloitte does annually in a number of industries. So in this particular case, we chose global financial services industry study, and this is something that we had done in 2010 as well and was very well received by the chief security officers across the states, and so we continued that trend. And in addition, we wanted to look at identify some additional trends towards emerging technology areas like mobile and cloud security. And in 2011, following the 2010 study, the NASCIO Cyber Security and Privacy Committee had come up with a taxonomy of security services. And one of the wish lists of the chief security officers this year was, well, can we do a self-assessment of the maturity of the services based on the taxonomy that was defined? So those questions were included as part of the study, as part of this year's study. And in addition, another major difference was we also wanted to get an assessed level of awareness from the expanded business stakeholders. And as we go through this webinar today, we will bring some insights from what the business stakeholders really thought about certain issues related to cybersecurity and compare and contrast with the security officers and the CIOs. And in terms of the execution itself, well, we leveraged our global security studies and tailored the questions for state government and used the 2010 questions to really come up with a set of questions. And once we had a set of questions, the NASCIO Security Committee had chosen a survey advisory council consisting of 5 chief security officers. They went through, worked with us, and reviewed the questions and really helped us refine the questions further. And the respondents took the survey over a 4 to 5 week period in July and August, and that's the result that we are now seeing on the screen. We had an impressive response. We had 50 responses from the chief security officers or their equivalents, and that is 48 states and 2 territories. And the state official survey, which is a shorter version of the survey because we didn't really want to go into the details that the chief security officers answered the survey with. I mean, the chief security officers took about 60 to 90 minutes to answer about 64 questions. The business stakeholder survey consisted of 17 questions, and we got 63 official responses for those questions. And the responses came in from different organizations. We have them listed on the screen for you. The state auditors, controllers, and treasurers, attorney generals, secretaries of state, state personnel, and state chief administrators. So a number of different organizations, and so people from different organizations responded to the state business for the state official survey. Now, once we completed the survey, we took some time to analyze the results and produce 2 sets of reports. One report that's commonly available and it's published. It's available on the website, as well as it is available in a printed form. So in case anyone is interested in a printed copy, please let NASCIO or us know. And in addition to the printed version of the study, there was also a confidential benchmark report that every one of the Chief Information Security Officer or CIO that responded on behalf of the state received. And the benchmark study really compared individual state response with the aggregated results. So each respondent had a benchmark of where did they stand with respect to the rest of the state's aggregated response. Now, we saw a little bit of background on how we went about doing the study, and maybe it's time for us to take a closer look at what the survey results were and what the study really consisted of. I'm going to invite Kristen Miller to provide, maybe from our background as a former CIO, maybe Kristen, it will be good for you to just provide what was your biggest takeaways and what you thought was the most important aspect of the survey. And after that, we will go into the details of the key findings. Kristen?
Sure. Thanks so much, Srini. Hopefully everybody can hear me as well. You know, I think what surprised me the most in looking back at past year results, as well as, you know, when I was a CIO, kind of looking what the challenges are, you know, we saw that they were the availability and adequacy of the staff skill sets. We saw a challenge around the adequacy of budget levels to meet program goals. And we, you know, saw and have experienced challenges around executive support and authority. And what is interesting in the findings this year is that those problems still persist. Similar to 2 years ago, you know, CISOs clearly and CIOs understand the importance of cybersecurity, but continue to really, I think, gain solid traction in the areas of budget and stakeholder buy-in, two very critical components. We're also still seeing challenges around security governance as well as just an overall strategy. So those continue to challenge states. Another interesting point that I think came from looking at, you know, the data a couple years ago and who completed it versus the data this year and who completed it is, you know, people have changed in their roles, but again, the results have not. So I think that's a good indication that this isn't just a, you know, political lens or a lens of the person in the seat. It's actually the data. You know, despite over 31 new state CIOs and 22 new state CISOs, the challenges reported in this survey are still very consistent with the ones I highlighted earlier. But there is, you know, one, I think, very positive result from this year, and Srini, you touched on it, has to do with the business stakeholder survey. You know, in conducting that survey, one of the highlights for me was that about 92% of elected officials said that cybersecurity was, you know, most and or very important to them. So clearly there's something in that response that CISOs can leverage, and I know we're going to talk more about how we do that throughout the survey results today, but clearly it's important. So, you know, the time is right for CISOs and CIOs to leverage that sense of importance. You know, those are some of the challenges that, you know, we have been facing and continue to face. But this study also looked at, what can we do, what are the action steps, what are the solutions to some of these challenges to try to move the needle forward on cybersecurity across the states. And as you see in the graphic in front of you, we think there are really 5 key action steps that CISOs and CIOs can take, and again, we'll explore these in more detail later. But first, assess and communicate security risks. Look at adopting a security framework like federal NIST, and we're going to talk about all the different regulatory frameworks that are out there. But adopt one. Then perform the regular compliance assessments against that framework for yourself and across the enterprise. And then lastly, communicate those risks to the business stakeholders, that group we just talked about. Today, one of the results we found is that reporting is largely ad hoc, and our hypothesis is that leaves state executives pretty uninformed about the risks. So, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say, let's communicate more about the risks and leverage, again, that criticality and that buy-in that they say they have. The second action step that states can take is to strategize. Explore creative paths to improve cybersecurity effectiveness within the states, specifically with the challenge of the federated models that we see state to state. Consider applying some general IT principles around competency centers and shared services models to the challenge of security, compliance, coverage, and all the other services associated with that. It helps you to maximize scarce resources of people as well as technology and dollars, and avoid that duplication across the agencies. Third, invest in partner. Really look for alternate funding sources and as well as collaborating with other entities. As we just talked above, if states look at potentially a shared services or competency center for security services, the cost savings from that can be fed back into projects that help you close and help you meet some of your cybersecurity enterprise goals. Additionally, look at some of the federal funding sources that your agencies are using to implement their solutions. Being able to partner with an agency to help make sure that cybersecurity requirements are met in their applications and in their priority programs, that should be considered and addressed, and I think you then have a great ally there for a funding mechanism as well. Fourth, educate. We know that the #1 cause of security breaches is user error, so more effective user education is still needed, and it's still a huge opportunity. And then lastly, measure. By better articulating risks and audit findings with the business stakeholders, again, we think you're going to be able to leverage that buy-in that they're ready to give you, as they told us. Get into a routine of reporting of threats, projects, status. It's essential for building that buy-in. And then lastly, associated with this one, and for all the corporate members on the phone as well, we can't forget the third parties. With the greater use of outsourcing for cybersecurity functions, more needs to be done with managing that growing shared risk. So, there needs to be a continued focus on audit and continuous monitoring of third-party compliance. So, Srini, that's just kind of a quick summary of what I think is interesting about the challenges and how they continue to sort of evolve but don't go away. And I think 5 steps that states can take as they kind of look at again, moving the needle on their programs forward. I'm going to turn it back over to you because I know you want to go into the raw data that shows how we got to some of these problems as well as some of the action steps.
Hey, thank you, Kristen. And maybe I'll ask Doug. Do you have any initial comments on the key takeaways?
No, Srini, I think Kristen did an excellent job in summarizing it. I think for those of you who are on the webinar, the infographic that's used is also a very succinct overview of the key results of the survey and is available on the NASCIO website. And I think that's something that you can distribute to those other folks and entities that need to really understand this and look at these, again, 5 simple ways, again, to reduce risk within the states and also with other jurisdictions. I think this is applicable to obviously local governments and other public entities. But it's clear that given what we have today is, what's been characterized as a major kind of knowing-doing around the large percentage of state officials and elected officials and others who know about the nature of the risk and the potential consequences, and yet we're having a difficult challenge in the execution side. And I think that's borne out by the rest of the data we're going to go through today, where less than a quarter of the state CISOs are very confident about their protecting the state's assets against external threats, and it certainly is timely, ripped from the headlines, the magnitude of some of the more recent events, that a very high percentage of our respondents felt that states were at risk through aggressive criminal attacks, and also 82% said they were very, very concerned about phishing and farming, directed attacks against state employees that would expose personally identifiable information. So the data, unfortunately, has been borne out with the evidence of what's taking place today in the states. With in the last year, some of the largest, if not the largest, data breaches that we've seen based on security incidents. And so, again, we want to walk through the data now and provide some of those key results, and then close with some action steps and a call to action to the state. So back to you, Srini.
Thank you, Doug. And so Kristen and Doug, both thank you for a good summary of the key findings. And as we go into a deeper dive of the four major key finding areas, one is related to budget and strategy, second is related to authority and governance, third is preparedness for emerging threats, and the last one is compliance, and how compliance can be a lever for the CISO leadership. So let's start with the first one, and you would see that we would go through each one of the areas, and I will go in a rapid succession, present some data that came out of the survey, and then we will talk a little bit about what that really means, and what did we infer from those results that we got. So the first one is really the budget and strategy connection. And I mean, as you would have all expected, one of the biggest barriers, or the biggest barrier for cybersecurity effort identified in the survey, was budget, or the lack thereof it. Now, this lack of funding is really putting the state at risk, but we combined the strategy along with the budget, and we'll tell you why as we go into deeper into the results. And we feel that the communicating the strategy and really reporting on risks, progress, and results to business stakeholders will be critical to enlist that support, to get that support from the business stakeholders. So let's dive right into the topic of with some of the questions and how the states responded. So the first one, just to set you the context, the headline here gives the topic, and the Q8 here in this particular case is the actual number of the questions. So Doug mentioned earlier we are not covering every single one of the 64 CISO questions or the 17 questions that the officials responded with, but we are simply picking a few of them to show highlights of it. The study itself has a few more questions than what we are showing today, but please walk with me through as we talk about the different questions. So the first one is functions within the purview of the CISO. So you are seeing the responses, and very encouraging to see that chief security officers are rating cybersecurity strategy and planning as one of the top functions that they are responsible for. And compared to 2010, another positive trend is that 82% of the CISOs said measurement of cybersecurity program and reporting are within their purview of responsibilities as well. So that is representing an increase. Moving to the next topic that I wanted to highlight, the budget question. So really, what is the percentage of overall IT budget is allocated to cybersecurity? Now we have two graphs here. One is from the year 2010, and the one is the latest one, 2012. And we changed the ranges on you guys a little bit, so you are not seeing complete apples to apples. And the main reason is on the right-hand side graph, you see that in the 2010 survey, the chief security officers responded, or at least 50% of the chief security officers responded, that their cybersecurity was about 1 to 3% of overall IT budget. But one feedback we got at the time was, but it is really closer to 1% than 3%, and maybe we need to fine-tune or refine the ranges. And that was the reason why we changed the ranges this time. And we still see that that most of the responses are in the 1 to 2% category. 42% of the respondents said the cybersecurity is about 1 to 2% of the overall IT budget. Now, there is really no magic number that is the right percentage, but some of the research analysts are talking about maybe upwards of 5 or between 5 and 10%. But this is really a parameter to watch as the states are spending more on cybersecurity and how this increases.
Srini, this is Doug. Let me jump in here with a little commentary. I think this is this data reflects the overall IT spend in the states, which we always use about 2% of the total state budget across the board. And I'd just say generally and usually states are spending about 2% of their total budget on IT, and that's across the board. And so I think these numbers reflect that. And unfortunately, what we've seen since certainly 2008 and during certainly the deep recession and the fiscal stress on the states, where we had about 48 states that were in major fiscal stress, that they were cutting their IT budget, and the cybersecurity budgets were not held harmless from that. Many of them, we saw reduction in force, and we saw reduction in available budgets in the cybersecurity, even at the enterprise level within the CIO's office. So they were enduring the same pain that the other programs were. And I think in reality, when you look at the private sector, they were increasing their cybersecurity budgets during that time frame, recognizing the aggressive and increased nature of some of the threats. So it's something to keep in mind as you're looking at the budget allocation data on this slide.
Thank you, Doug. And then moving on to the next one, which were the top 5 barriers that the states identified this time? Lack of sufficient funding, or the budget issue, that was the top. And then the increasing sophistication of threats, as well as the inadequate availability of skilled professionals. They came in the second and third. So we really look at the insufficient resources. Now compare that against the growing sophistication of threat and lack of skilled resources. These barriers are really daunting, because the combination of these barriers would indicate that the states are really at risk.
And Srini, just a comment on particularly the cybersecurity professionals. When you look at the data that we collected in 2011 on the state IT workforce, within most states, 30 to 40% of their state IT employees are eligible for retirement. And based on that survey data, the most difficult position to recruit for was in security and IT security, and that was number 1 out of all the other disciplines and job positions that we queried on. I think that, again, with the pressure on the federal government and trying to hire 10,000 cybersecurity professionals, and also in the private sector, many of the states are finding it extremely difficult to both recruit and attract. And once they do, our cybersecurity professionals are not in state government very long before they're headed for greener pastures.
Thank you, Doug. So now looking at the next result, this is really the executive support for cybersecurity projects. And 74% of the respondents said that there is commitment from the business executives, but not adequate funding. Now compare that to, Kristen mentioned before in her opening remarks, the state officials, which is the box on the insert. In the state official survey, state officials thought, or at least 92% of the state officials said, cybersecurity is extremely important or very important. And the CISO's feeling that 74% have commitment but not adequate funding would leave some room for maybe more communication of risks and reporting to the officials would help shake some money loose from their budgets for cybersecurity efforts. And looking at a similar comparison with the global financial services industry, organizations of similar size. Now we are talking about banks and financial services institutions that have more than 10,000 employees. Now looking at the budget situation there, in 2012 survey, Deloitte NASCIO survey, state governments say only 14% of the respondents said that they saw an increase in budget. And whereas in the financial services industry, more than 60% of the organizations saw an increase in budget. And similarly, the year-over-year trend, the same story. The financial services institutions are seeing a good increase in budget year-over-year, as well as overall. Now, that's kind of the whole budget and the combination of budget and the strategy, and we really believe that the budget continue to be an issue. That's a fact, and maybe enlisting the support of the business stakeholders through more communication and better strategy is one way to potentially get additional budget. Now, Doug, do you want to comment on this particular section of the key finding?
Yes, thank you, Srini. And I think it's, again, an element of the subtitle of the report is around collaboration. And I think it's key that there must be stronger and more often communication. Again, I think what we found from the survey, and certainly what we know anecdotally, is that the state government officials, particularly elected officials, understand perhaps at a theoretical level the consequences of the risks. But what they don't understand is the reality of what happens on the ground. And I think particularly most troublesome is the fact that there is not enough communication. And I believe our suggestion has been that state budget officers and state budget directors need to be briefed on a regular basis. And I think that's clear from the evidence, is not only with that group, but also with some of the other state officials, particularly those that are extremely interested in security issues. And I would include the Secretaries of State, because they have initiatives around business identity theft, and also the Attorney Generals, the General Counsels and the elected Attorney Generals in the states, many of them are focused on privacy, they're focused on identity theft, they're focused on cyber security fraud, and they already have an interest in these areas. So we're going to urge our state CISOs and CIOs to, again, communicate and collaborate with those other groups.
Thank you, Doug. We can now move on to the second area of our key finding, which is in the area of authority and governance. And we continue to see lack of an enterprise authority and visibility for the chief security officers and CIOs. But we also feel that it is unlikely to change soon. So in that environment, what kind of an innovative and collaborative approach can the chief security officers take in order to move the initiatives forward? So in this particular section, I'm going to highlight a few similar survey results. The first one relates to the scope of the chief security officer authority, and most of the respondents have authority over the executive branch agencies and departments, and very few states responded that they have authority across the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Now, we didn't show that result, but the good news is that 96% of the respondents said that they have a chief information security officer. That's really encouraging. Every state has a chief information security. Almost every state has a chief information security officer. And the not so good news is it's still a position where the chief security officer has to coordinate across multiple agencies. They don't necessarily get the visibility of the audit findings and so forth that occur within the agencies. Now, the related area in the authority and visibility is the professionals that are reporting to the chief security officer. Now, looking at the professionals that are there in the states and comparing it between 2010 and 2012 in terms of the competency and the skill set gap, The graphic here shows shows the different comparisons, as well as the second part of the graphic. I just want to highlight the number part of it. About 50% of the respondents said they have 1 to 5 full-time equivalents reporting to them in the 2012 the NASCIO cybersecurity study, whereas similar-sized financial services organizations, 47% of them have more than 100 people under FTEs in their organization. Now, granted, because the chief security officer position is more of coordinating security across agencies, and individual agencies, particularly the large ones, may have their own cybersecurity professionals, there is still a huge gap in terms of the number of FTEs, as well as in the skill sets. So this is an area that where there needs to be continued focus in terms of how to attract, retain cybersecurity professionals, and also find budget to increase the number of them. Now, that really brings up the next question Doug talked about. Well, it's really difficult to bring the right talent and attract them, and even if there are cybersecurity professionals working in a state or agency environment, with the demand that exists for this particular skill set in the market, retaining these professionals is also a challenge. So the question that we want to bring forth now here is, well, what are the states thinking about outsourcing of certain cybersecurity functions? And if you look at the graphic here, some of the services such as threat management and monitoring services, there seems to be more appetite to outsource certain functions like that. And similarly, threat and risk assessments. And some respondents also said, as a matter of policy, the states are not outsourcing any of the security functions. So one of the things that one could consider, or you could consider, is looking at using outsourced resources to perform threat and risk assessments. Having an independent assessment and reporting on it to the business stakeholders may be another way of communicating or better communicating the risks and elevating the risks to the business stakeholders. And the last topic on this particular area is the third-party service providers. Now, most of the respondents talked about addressing the cybersecurity risks through contractual vehicles as part of the contract, or using non-disclosure agreements and so forth. And the reality, based on some of the things that we are seeing in the last few years in the state government, is even though contractually the risks may be transferred, when there is a breach or when an incident occurs, the state executives are still the ones that are accountable and responsible to answer to the public. So some additional measures, in addition to maybe trusting the contractual vehicle to transfer the risk, in addition to it, perhaps doing verification of those measures is also another thing to consider. Now, in summary, the CISOs are operating in a federated or distributed environment, and it is something that is not changing, and it has not changed drastically in the CIO environment over the last few years. And so it'll be prudent to look at ways to see how they can creatively evolve their role in such a governance model, looking at potentially use of shared services and leveraging resources across multiple agencies, and could be one such measure. We talked about it in the study. We gave some examples of states that are starting to do that, either shared services for certain competencies or shared services for certain security services that agencies could provide, and the state chief security officers could promote that and could coordinate that. So similar innovative and creative approaches may need to be taken in light of the challenges in authority governance as well as budget. Now, Doug, do you want to comment on this particular area?
Just a couple of comments, Srini, because we believe this is critically important for the success in the states. And quite frankly, from our view, it's often remarkable that states are really protecting their data and infrastructure as well as they are in most instances, given some of these challenges, the lack of enterprise visibility, the lack of authority, the skills gaps and competency issues we're seeing, the lack of resources just in the data that we got around the FTE complement supporting cybersecurity is problematic, and we know that agencies, independent agencies, certainly have cybersecurity professionals in those positions, but again, they're not part of that government-wide model. So I think that like organizational models for chief information officers, we try not to be prescriptive, but we believe that CIO and CISO authority and functions because of statute or policy or executive order are going to vary from state to state. Overall, the most effective state programs are those in which information security governance is part of that kind of enterprise and holistic government-wide approach to IT management. And I think that's really important because there has to be clear lines of authority and responsibility for cybersecurity, and someone must be held accountable. And I think that's the challenge of the diffuse nature we have today. And in addressing the third-party contractors and having an associated framework for that, simply signing away a piece of paper is not going to do the trick. I mean, it needs to be, again, ongoing compliance. This is clearly the trust but verify model when you have third-party contractors and others doing work on behalf of the state. So with that, I think we can move into the preparedness for the threats, which I know was a significant new part of our survey this year, where we added a lot of dimensions of security, vulnerabilities, and adoption of new technologies.
Well, thank you, Doug. And yes, this is also the fun part of the finding, because the technology adoption in emerging technologies in the state government, mobile, cloud, there is a lot of excitement among the business stakeholders and technology stakeholders about what these technologies can do. And this topic talks about, well, is this an opportunity, and can this be used as an opportunity by the security officers to really promote better security on these emerging technologies, as well as to secure the business support? So let us look at some of the questions here. So this one is a complicated graph. You can look at it at your leisure time for individual areas. But the point of this is the adoption of new technologies is inevitable. I mean, states start initially with prohibiting the use of certain things, social media, mobile devices, and so forth, and eventually start embracing them. So maybe, and particularly when it comes to security, most of these new technologies, mobile, cloud, big data, the biggest barrier that comes to play right up front is security. And what can the chief security officers use to really enable these emerging technologies, and by doing that, become an ally to the business stakeholders? Now, the next part of this is on the emerging threats is again relates to the communication with the business stakeholders. This graphic here gives the comparison of what the chief security officers and the state officials felt in terms of their level of confidence against threats originating externally and internally. The only point I want to highlight here is, if you look at the very confident and extremely confident bar charts on both the graphs, you see that the business stakeholders seem to have much more confidence in the ability of the technology CIOs and CISOs to protect against these threats. So the chief security officers seem to be less confident compared to the business stakeholders. So maybe the takeaway here is, well, if the chief security officers are not feeling that confident, they need to be communicating about those risks and issues more to the business stakeholders, so that they are starting to look at it and providing the support necessary. And the next slide really talks about the changing phase of some of the breaches and threat information, and a comparison between 2010 and 2012. And as we are seeing from some of the well-published issues, the emerging cybercrime and state-sponsored threats seem to be on the rise. And I mean, I already talked about the biggest takeaway is, can the chief security officers, when they start looking at a new technology, or when the business or other technology folks are looking at embracing some new technologies, start saying yes. Yes, we can do it, but we got to do it securely. And let us see if that is going to help get closer to the business stakeholders, because I'm pretty sure that as the states are coming up with budget for mobile technology or cloud adoption, because of the well-published nature of the risks related to security, you're going to get funding in those areas. Doug?
The proliferation of all these technologies, Srini, you're correct. And social media, certainly the cloud. If you look at our current top 10 survey, mobility has rocketed to number 3 on that list. And the mobile agenda, mobile services, mobile apps. These are these are essentially the technologies that are not going to go away. They grow dramatically, both within state government and used by citizens and consumers. So I think the states need to wrap their arms around these and also enable the utilization in a secure environment. And we've certainly seen the responses to that. It will not happen by default. It must happen, by design. So again, we urge the states to participate in examining the policies of many others that have already kind of blazed the trail.
Thank you, Doug. And the next area is compliance. As you noticed, we named this particular study a call for collaboration and compliance. We talked quite a bit about the collaboration aspects for collaborating with the agencies and business stakeholders. And we'll talk a little bit about the compliance here. Because states typically had not used compliance as a big lever in getting either funding or support, and maybe there is a case to be made here. Now, looking at the regulatory frameworks, 82% of the respondents said that they are looking at complying with the NIST standards, the federal NIST standards, and there are a number of different other compliance requirements that individual state agencies have to go through. Now, given that, can the states adopt one framework, maybe the federal NIST framework, as the framework that they're going to comply with, and make sure that the agencies consistently are assessed against compliance against the NIST framework? And adopting such a base framework and looking for compliance would really help compare the risks across the board with a common framework. And looking at the next question, this is related to internal and external audit findings. Now, the past 12 months, most of the state respondents said that they have at least had 1 or 2 audit findings. And in spite of the fact that some of the chief security officers always talk about how they don't have visibility to the agency audit findings, it is true that the states have audit findings. And it is also a trend that we are seeing that more and more audits are becoming much more intense. More and more federal audits, IRS audits or Health and Human Services audits are becoming more and more intense. So there are audit findings, and how the CISOs can take those audit findings and translate the risk and really, again, use it to communicate with the business stakeholders. Now, this is a quote from the regulation on how it might have helped the financial services industry. We are really talking about regulation related to IT risk and security risk. And the takeaway here is that while the actual value of how much money is spent on the financial services industry to comply with the regulation and the return on it may be debatable, what is absolutely true is that the regulations have helped elevate the risks and the compliance issues to the board and executive management. And so that is the takeaway in terms of, well, can we use the audits and the need to comply with the regulations one step further and use it to gain business visibility? And looking at the current nature and frequency of reporting that the chief security officers do today, now you see that to the top executive management. Now we are talking about the governors, state legislatures, and agency, IT, and business stakeholders. And you see that we don't have, or today the states don't have a regular communication mechanism for communicating the risks and scorecards and the progress to the executive stakeholders. So that may be an area to really look into. And as you are putting your security strategy and programs together and really focus in on the reporting aspects of it. And the last one is the structure of state's privacy program. Only 18% of the state respondents said that they have a chief privacy officer role or an equivalent role. I mean, we all know that most of the large agencies have their own individual privacy officers focusing on the business of that particular agency, but there may be good value in having a chief privacy officer function. I mean, particularly if it is not an IT-related function, and this could really help complement the chief information security officer and also could be a voice to the business stakeholders in terms of enlisting support. Doug, do you have comments on this particular section?
Yes, Jude, just quickly before we wrap up, and one comment for those participants on our webinar today. We've gotten a few questions we've been able to answer on the fly, but if you have any questions that you'd like to submit, I urge you to do it now before we wrap up just in the next 5 minutes or so. But again, in this area, was probably unusual for many of those folks in state government for us to urge more compliance and use those audit findings. So certainly no state CIO or CISO wants to get adverse audit findings. But believe, the situation here is we clearly have a crisis of prioritization and where resources are directed within the states. And if these compliance audits and other reports can generate interest, particularly from elected officials and political appointees, that's the leverage that needs to be used. And we also would probably recognize that the number of frameworks that are available out there and security frameworks that are used by the states are overlapping, can be complex. They're not harmonized, particularly those from the federal level when you look at a number of these, but they all are in effect for all of the states. And I think the challenge here is we did a brief almost 3 years ago now on desperately seeking security framework to recognize the fact that it is a challenge. But given the fact that we do have one fairly universal standard security framework in NIST that can be utilized, we want states, particularly those that are less mature in this area, to have something to hang their hat on when they go forward with their security architecture and their policies and exploring their own framework. So again, I think there's certainly ways to use these audit findings to leverage more action. And we all know that privacy is a key function of the state governments, but the reality is that what we've seen in the past is that the state CISOs and CIOs are inheriting privacy functions by default, and it really needs to be something that's discussed at a higher level, and that is not taking place in the states. And these are very large corporate entities that need to have someone who is in that position. So again, I think we're ready to kind of move on to our final comments, Srini.
Yes, thank you. And I think the call for action part of the study, we have included a series of these recommendations that really we talked throughout the webinar today. And so we have just listed them, and please take the time to read through and see what might apply for your state and your environment. Doug, maybe are there any questions that you want to take on? And we have a few minutes left.
Yes, Renee, I think we've got a few questions, again, we've been able to answer along the way, and also should note that we've got questions related to getting copies of the slides. They will be posted. However, if you'd like to get a copy of the slide deck prior to its being posted on the NASCIO website, then go ahead and email Chad Grant. That's cgrant@amrms.com here at NASCIO headquarters. Again, cgrant@amrms.com, and Chad will get you the slides. I've got a couple of questions we can wrap up here with, Srini. One is, do we know how IT consolidation either helped or exacerbated the security posture of state systems and data? We did not ask that question, so I think response to that would probably be speculation. But certainly, if you look at the business cases that state CIOs have developed over the years for consolidation, part of that business case rationale is the fact that security would be enhanced through consolidation of disparate systems, reducing the diversity and complexity, having a more homogeneous environment for security support, particularly within as we've seen a number of states reduce the number of data centers, both from a physical security and a logical security standpoint. That would probably point to stronger security overall, but I don't believe anyone has conducted any studies of state systems to confirm that assumption on my part. Anything from you on that, Srini?
No, I agree with you. I think we didn't ask that question, and while we may think that because everything is centralized and the authority aspect of the challenge that we talked about may not exist, we still need to see how effective the security and controls are applied in that environment.
Okay. Another question is, and I think this probably may be our last one we can do on our webinar today, is what is your opinion on articulating in state law sanctions or punishments for non-compliant or non-remediating agency? What kinds of sanctions might work, if at all? And again, I'm not sure we're going to see that in law or statute, but certainly you might see that in policy with compliance with states that have a very, coordinated and centralized governance structure around their security architecture, that there's probably conditions in there related to things like disconnecting network security, network services, and other forms of sanctions for non-compliance. But again, I think it's the command and control model in this area does not work very well in most cases, and I think as is indicated by the subtitle of the report this year, collaboration and a better understanding of the consequences of the risks is probably a better path forward than some type of command and control function under sanctions. They haven't seen those areas that have used those. The results have not been borne out by the current nature of the environment today in the states.
Yeah, I agree with you, Doug. I think that the best that can happen in the immediate future is assessing the risks and bringing transparency to the risks of maybe by individual agencies. And I think just bringing it out and being transparent about it would help the agencies take measures to improve.
Yeah. And we have certainly talked to states to understand there's the blade swings both ways. You know, states certainly, particularly in the enterprise CIO, would like to issue report cards and have transparent scores out there for the cybersecurity posture of states, a dashboard, so to speak, that actually provides a report card function. However, that immediately then provides, unfortunately, the bad guys for a path to perhaps agencies that are less secure than they might be. And so it is a dangerous game to play. So that is a challenge. So those things need to be done internally with perhaps report card functions and more transparency about the nature of that. Well, I apologize to some of our other questioners. We got kind of a flurry of questions at the end, and we'll try to address those offline. But before we close, I certainly want to offer our thanks to, first of all, our speakers today, our welcome remarks by President Brenda Decker, certainly Kristen Miller at Deloitte, and Srini, who was really carried the yeoman's share of the work today by going through the question set. And again, I want to thank certainly all of you participants, a very large number that made this event very successful. I hope you walked away with meaningful information. And again, it was only a snapshot of all the data that's available in the report. So we urge you to again, download that report and certainly follow the progress. And we'll be reporting, I'm sure the Security and Privacy Committee of NASCIO will be issuing more work products and deliverables through the 2013 calendar year as we begin our work. So again, on behalf of NASCIO and our state CIOs and members, we thank you for your time and attention today and wish you a good rest of the day and happy holiday season.